Suppose a random sample of 406 people who were either clergy members, doctors, or lawyers were tested and classified by the Myers-Briggs personality preference as being either extroverted or introverted. A chi-square analysis was completed, so here we see that the extroverteds, there were 62 clergy members who were extroverted, 68 doctors, and 56 lawyers. For introverted, there were 45 clergy members, 94 doctors, and 81 lawyers. Notice the cell format tells you that the row percent, so 62 divided by 107 is 57.94%, 45 divided by 107 is 42.06%, and so on. Those are given in parentheses. The expected counts I have highlighted in blue, and we can see that all of those are 5 or greater. So it does seem like this would be a valid exercise in terms of the expected cell counts all being 5 or more. We notice that our chi-square test statistic is given here. The value is about 8.65 with a p-value of 0.0132. So based on the results, does it appear that occupation depends on personality preference? Use a 5% level of significance. Now remember, in this material, when we say depend on, what we mean is if you just randomly sampled someone, what would the chance that they maybe were a lawyer? Now, if you know the person that you sampled is introverted, does that change your opinion about the chance of the person being a lawyer? Do that for each of the occupations, and if you ever say, yes, my opinion changes, that's what we mean by a dependent relationship, or that occupation does seem to depend on personality preference. What would a hypothesis test look like for this scenario? Well, we begin by stating our hypotheses. So occupation does not depend on personality preference is the null. That is your independence assumption of occupation and personality preference, the two categorical variables. Under the alternative, we say that occupation does depend on personality preference. We're going to reject the null hypothesis if the p-value is less than 0.05 because we were told that we were going to use a 5% level of significance for the test when we're comparing profession and personality preference. Next, we want to write down our test statistic, which is the 8.65 when we round that off to a couple of digits after the decimal point. And that gives me a p-value of 0.0132. Next, we want to look at our decision. The decision rule says that if the p-value, which was 0.0132, is less than 0.05, then we're going to reject the null hypothesis. In this case, we would end up rejecting the null hypothesis and conclude at a 5% level of significance there is enough evidence, and again that's because my test statistic gives me a small p-value, that I can conclude occupation depends on personality preference. So the hypothesis test would have these steps to be complete. Next, for each occupation, okay, so for clergies, for doctors, and for lawyers, calculate the percentage who are extroverts. How do these values relate to the conclusion of the hypothesis test? Well, in this case, the percentages would be 57.94% for clergy, 41.98% for doctors, and 40.88% for lawyers. Notice that clergy, okay, tend to more likely be extroverted than either doctors or lawyers. That suggests a dependent relationship, which was the conclusion from the hypothesis test, where we said occupation does depend on personality preference. Now, you should be able to get these 3% values by looking at the raw count data, okay, and calculating 62 divided by 107 times 100. 68 divided by 162 times 100, 56 divided by 137 times 100. And you should be able to get those three numbers that are sitting in the parentheses.